First of all, you need to apply. You need to demonstrate that you have experience, and if you have a college degree, you get to demonstrate you have 4,500 hours. You have some formal project management training you have to demonstrate you went through. And you're going to need some references, just like you have a CV. PMI actually does check up on you, and it's there is a form of audit that happens, but it only happens to about 3 or 5 out of 100 of us. But for the most part, this is the way they validate. You have experience, you have formal training, and you step up to take the exam. Let's look at the exam. It's 4 hours long, and it's time, and the timer never stops. There are 200 questions, and they're all multiple choice, A, B, C, or D. You can get questions right or wrong, right? There's only one right answer. So if you guess, you're going to have a 25% chance of getting it right. And the questions that you get right are counted. The questions that you don't get right are not counted against you. So the exam plays fair. It actually says, please answer all the questions. Now, this is where things get interesting, okay? So you can imagine 200 questions in 4 hours, and that is, if you don't take a break, it's about 1 to 1.2 minutes per question. So the exam creates a state of urgency. Let's keep that in the back of our mind. You're always going to be moving to the next problem, and you're always going to be thinking, how much time do I have left? And how do I prioritize? How do I spend more time on the harder questions, and how do I spend less time on the easier questions? And you're going to have to be thinking like this, because that's what a project manager does, right? They're constantly prioritizing, and they're constantly working under a sense of urgency. So in a lot of ways, the structure of the exam itself participates in creating that sense of what you experience as a project manager. And how do you behave under this sense of urgency? That's part of what it measures. So the exam creates a sense of urgency. It moves you from issue to issue to issue, crisis management plus analysis and review plus decision making plus engaging and communicating, just like a project manager's role. Interesting. So here's how the exam works. It doesn't measure whether or not you know the knowledge. Well, it does. It does. And memorization plays a role in preparing for this, okay? You have to know things. However, it looks at your response and behaviors. It creates a scenario, and then based on the question it asks what's the best answer. It looks at problem solving. It looks at how you analyze and assess for a certain set of problems. Do you know what the best thing to do? On a certain problem, if you don't have a lot of good options, what's the least severe of these poor options? It doesn't look at what you know primarily. It looks at what you do. It creates an environment where it puts you, again, what did we say earlier? Puts you in a situation. It gives you an issue or a risk that you need to work on. And it says, what do you do now? These are situational questions. Now, I teach about 100 to 150 people. And often these people come back, and in our community forum, they talk about what they experienced, how they prepared, what worked and didn't work. From the experience, people commonly say most of the questions were situational. And the people that provide very precise data says about 80% of the questions are, what do you do now? What's the next thing you need to do? What's the best thing you need to do? What's the first thing you need to consider? Or what do you not need to consider? Or what did you forget? And this is how it actually measures. It doesn't just measure, do you know the facts and figures? What it measures is, do you know how to change those facts and figures into actions, right? Now, let's give you a little background here on the questions. There's 3 parts to each one of these questions, and it really helps based on, my students' responses. If you think about these questions in this manner, there's always a scenario, right? Here's where you are, here's the data, here's the information. Where am I? What am I doing? What's happening in around me, right? And then there's something called the real question. Often the scenario does not have the real question. And this is a problem, right? You're misleading. If you're reading a question real quickly, and here's the scenario, and the question is on another topic, you're not going to get the option right. So there's a lot of attention to detail you have to apply. In that 1 to 1.2 minutes, you have to be reading quickly but effectively, and you have to be able to discern what's the difference between the scenario and the real question. And then it's going to have 4 options. And the 4 options, some of them may be really different, some of them may be almost identical. So you have to look at the variations or the variances between the options too. And that is how you're going to prioritize. So we're looking for patterns. We're looking for things that actually set out, what am I supposed to be looking at? If the exam gives you a table, the scenario and the real question are going to tell you which column and which row you need to focus on. Where is the solution to my problem? And then comparing that to the 4 options and the variations, you will close in on the right answer. This is what we call psychometrics. It doesn't measure your knowledge per se. It measures how you apply it in the role of a project manager. It puts you in the seat of a project manager's chair in each and every question, and it asks, what do you do now? 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 Okay, so we now know how the exam works. And we all know now what the exam tests and how it tests.